Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. Been a little minute since I've done a mix retrospective. This record is going to be Far Away by Amirror and Akon. It's a record that I did a while ago. I'm just going to play a little bit of it and then discuss what went into the recording and mixing. So let's kick it off from the beginning. Here we go.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day. Right now I can't breathe. This is what you do to me when you go far away. Hey, 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 far away. Hey, 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 hey. My body needs your body. Far away. Think it over when I'm sober. Just want to love ya, been it over. Trapped in the corner, I put it on ya. Take it right now, now, now. Don't you like the way I go?
Alright, so my opinions on my own mix here. This is maybe only a couple of years old. There's a couple of things that I wish that I had done a little bit better. I wish that the drum fills I had kind of leaned into a little bit more. I hadn't quite gotten the surprise effect of some of the drum rolls and hits that show up in Afropop. So I was still a little bit modest with that stuff. Even though it's like evenly balanced, it should probably be a little bit more surprising. There's also a synth in there that I wish I had made a little bit fuller. Those are my two kind of nitpicky critiques. In terms of the things that I like the smoothness and fullness of the low end that I've got going on here. I like the texture that I've got going on the drums. I feel like the groove is really good. I like my ambience work, and I like my general balances. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this mix. I'm pretty proud of it. I stand by it. And so now I'm going to give you the kind of breakdown of what's going on. So I'm going to start by muting up the vocals. Most of the work is going into the vocals. The production was done by Kublan, and he's really good. Really, really good. He's one of those producers where you turn the faders up and everything sounds good and you go, well, now what? And then as you start to work through it, you start to figure some things out, but it's more like technical stuff to make it as good as it can possibly be, rather than correcting things that need to happen. So starting from the low end here, I've got a couple of 808 tracks. There's these sort of 808 fills, and then there's this primary 808, and then there's a kick drum all coming together. Now, all of these sound great on their own, so the goal here was to get the best interplay between the kick and the 808 possible. Just faders up, taking nothing, just not even affecting anything. It sounds fine. So it's really about maximizing it, getting the absolute most there. So starting from the kick drum, I guess this is not even doing anything. So I guess I started doing something and then I just ultimately left it. So really the kick drum is just acting as a side chain. I'm sending it off a kick aux path here. And it's controlling a couple of things on the 808s, mainly the mid-range. So to get the 808s present, I have this huge boost to the mid-range here. It's covering a wide gamut of mid-range. However, every time the kick hits, this mid-range is getting attenuated. So if we watch what happens, What the net result of this is on both channels, incidentally. The net result of this is that every time the kick is hitting, the mid-range is where it was, but when the kick is not hitting, there's a mid-range exaggeration, which gives the 808 more buzz and presence. And so this allows the kick to hit and cut through, but also gives the 808 more presence, especially on smaller speakers, which is really important. And then we have a compressor on these additional 808 hits. Just to give them a little bit more body. That's the most of it, really. Then the very, very final move here is this black box. This is a very common technique that I use. I take all of my low-end elements and I sum them together on an aux track and I put black box on there. Usually, if you go into the Black Box HG2, you'll see these little MW things. That's somebody that I know. That's a friend of mine. These are my presets right here. They come with this plugin, and there's a few that sound really, really good. The 808 Lean Forward and Bass Woolly Mammoth are both really good when summing together both a kick and a bass, and Woolly Mammoth is the one that I usually go to. However, this time I tried something a little different. I went over to this ER Mix Vintage Wake Up and did some slight modifications on it. This ER guy might be Eric Rossi, and he might be the designer behind the black box, and he might also be an incredible engineer. His presets are fantastic, and they do exactly what they say they're going to do. So it gave it this sort of like old school but alive type of feel. I'll give you the before and after. After. Just wakes it up immediately, so sounds great. I very frequently use this plugin as a glue for my low end, and I don't think that there's any other way to really do that. Now, moving on to these higher percussions right here, I'm doing the same thing on all three channels with one particular plugin. This is another great technique that you can just kind of pull for yourself here. I'm using the Waves Kramer HLS, and I'm not really doing anything with it, but I'm doing everything with it. There are certain saturations you can get in the high end that really lift the sound out of a mix. First of all, as soon as you turn on the peak or trim, you get an effect, even if you don't start doing any gain or reduction. So by putting this mid-band to 6K, I'm getting a 6K bump. But the bigger thing is this mic setting. It creates a saturation that can be exaggerated through the use of the preamp, and it seems to kind of lift things in a really floaty way. I'll take the Kramer HLSs off. Cool. All right, it sounds good. Here's with it on. And it just brightens in a really nice, subtle way that's really, really cool. So coupled with the 808s, we end up with this for our sort of fundamental foundation. Yeah, our fundamental foundation for the record. Okay, so then we have the drum rolls right underneath that. This is where I feel like things could have maybe been a little bit better. I did some rides, clip gain specifically, on the drum rolls, but I feel like some of it could have been a little stronger. Yeah, like even if I left the back end as is, first of all, I think it could all be like maybe a little bit louder, like a couple dB louder in general, but like this front end of this should be more like that. All that cool stuff, that's really, really important for this style. Like, just Afropop in general seems to be across the board. All sorts of different genres of Afro just love having these kinds of fills really loud. And it works. It's really exciting to hear it that way. So, small misstep on my part, if I'm being honest. Then we have this kind of cool little crash thing. So originally it sounds like this. And it sounds good when we have this kind of reduced arrangement, but in the entire mix, it feels like it falls a little short. Like it's just a little too tight. So I actually originally used the UBK1, which can be a very heavy-handed compressor. But for the demonstration here, I'm switching over to Omnipressor. And this is going to take all of that ambience that's released from this gunshotish kind of sound and really exaggerate it. I like that. I like that it feels like it's sustaining longer. It makes it a little bit more of a moment. It's okay that it kind of clouds everything in the mix because it's only happening for very short time periods. I mean, longer than like a lot of one-time hits, but really not that long regardless. So it's okay to overwhelm a mix with something that's too bright or that masks everything or it's too bassy or the opposite, that isn't bright, that's like really band limited and like telephonic. As long as it's only lasting for a moment, those exaggerations actually become very exciting. Okay, then going down here, we've got our main melodic elements. So first is this chord. And that's a really important sound because it's basically allowing the top line to exist. This is the chord map that's giving us connectivity for our top line, giving us a structure for our song. This is what people are going to hear when they're covering it on an acoustic guitar or something like that. So this is a really important bedding element, plus the way that it stabs kind of helps to hold down the pulse. So I'm using wave center to exaggerate some of the reverb that was already printed into the sound. I'm using Spectre to exaggerate the very center mids. The very center mids are an extremely important part of the record. It's very hard to find something around the 400 to 800 hertz range that sounds good. But there's a lot of body and weight and color in that range. So if you can find a good place for it, an element that really represents that frequency well, I tend to gravitate toward exaggerating it. I know that's a little prescriptive, but you know, it's just how I feel. And then rolling off some lows. And I want to point out something right here. I'm not doing a high pass. One of the biggest misconceptions that seems to get propagated everywhere on YouTube and in general is that anything that doesn't want bass, you want a high pass. And I find that that can leave things feeling really anemic when really all you need to do is just shelve off or roll off some excess bass, but allow something to have the body that it wants to have, especially a prominent element like these chords. So I'll bypass my elements here, or my plugins here. And again, it sounds great as is. Like I said, Kublan is a really, really good producer, so there's nothing wrong with the way this sounds. I'm basically just capitalizing off of the fact that I can stretch out the sides and give it a little bit of energy in the mids. Now, here's where I misstepped a little bit. There's another synth that's pretty prominent in the record, this kind of like weird guitar thing. And I thinned it out because I wanted to make room for the vocals, but I think I thinned it a little too much. I feel like I could have taken whatever kind of cuts, like maybe this here, which is around that same 600 hertz range, or some of this stuff, which again is in that center mid range, you know, these kinds of cuts here. And maybe some of this roll off or something like that. I could have probably gotten rid of some of that if I had just pushed the vocals forward a little bit. I guess I was sort of in my blend the vocals in era at that point. So I'm just trying to like find that perfect level for the vocal where it blends with the record. But what I'm finding more and more is that a lot of today's pop music, whether it's Afro pop or, Latin pop or whatever kind of pop it is, a lot of it benefits from having the vocals just a little bit more forward than like perfectly blended. So maybe allowing this to be a little bit fuller and just maybe even just leaving the sound as it is. And just pushing the vocals a little bit more probably would have taken this mix from like an A to an A+. And then everything in the actual instrumental is getting compressed together using the Townhouse. I still really like this as a bus compressor. It does something nice to like the 300, 400 hertz range that I think allows things to warm up without being a dull warm. It's like an exciting and full warm. The other thing is that I'm using it specifically to get a sort of like thwappiness on the kick. So you'll notice that there's a few settings that deviate from the traditional ones. First of all, I'm using the 10-to-1 ratio, which is kind of almost like a limiter, and I'm using a pretty fast attack. I'm using the 1 millisecond attack, and I'm using the fast release. So basically, I'm using this as like a soft limiter. Don't be afraid to use something like a soft limiter in order to get a texture or a tone that you want. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing that makes you have to do the 2-to-1 attack 30, release 0.1 thing with an SSL style compressor. It's not the law. You can certainly deviate and find things that work better. And this allows the vocal also to kind of sit forward even when it's blended because of the limiting action that's happening on the transients. So with that said, let's jump into the vocals. The vocals are really interesting on this. So I did not track Amirror. I believe it was either Kurt who tracked Amirror in Atlanta, or it was Kublai who tracked Amirror herself. Either way, I believe the recording chain was a U87 to what I want to say is a BAE 1073, and it sounded really good. So, you know, always nice. What I did here was a pre-treatment. So when I track, I try to track in a way where the intention is there. So I'll use whatever compression or whatever kind of EQ I need in order to get something as close to a finished sound, whatever that might be, as possible. I am not a big fan of the idea of like, oh, you know, don't put on an EQ in the tracking because then you're committed to it. No, commit to it. It's better. You actually end up with a better, even if you misstep and you slightly overcompress or you slightly over EQ or something like that, you actually end up with a better mix anyway because you're still closer to your final result. And the closer you get to your final result in the tracking phase, the better your end result is going to be every single time. So don't be afraid to commit. Yes, you will screw it up sometimes. That's life, but you'll figure out a way to fix it anyway. So the Amirror lead here has, I don't believe the Q10 is active, but it has a little bit of EQ and the CLA2A compressor on there. I received that from Kublai. It was already on there, and I liked how it sounded. I put the Melodyne and Autotune on there. So Melodyne into Autotune is a really, really important part of my process. When I'm using Autotune, especially in modern music, a lot of the times I want the tone of the Autotune specifically. I'm not necessarily doing it just to like lock the pitch in. That's an added benefit, but a lot of the times I'm doing it to create this kind of synthy sheen that I think we've grown accustomed to hearing and that actually I like in most cases. Melodyne is a really important part of that because Melodyne allows me to get all of the pitch stuff in the right place so that Autotune is acting homogeneously, meaning the Autotune is sounding pretty much the same throughout. So most of the pitch work is done in Melodyne, and it's usually pretty transparent. But the way that I do it, and this is, I think, kind of important, is that I have Autotune set up the way that I want Autotune to sound on the second insert, and I use Melodyne monitoring through the Autotune, so I hear the overall effect the whole time. The reason I do this is because it might sometimes it might allow me to gravitate toward imperfect pitch settings in Melodyne that produce a better tonal result. So for anything where Autotune is going to be part of the sound and you're going to need to do some manual pitch correction, I really like the Melodyne while going into Autotune and monitoring through Autotune setup. So once that's all done though, then I commit that and we come down here and then I'm doing the mix. This is where the mix happens on another channel because this is effectively like I'm creating what it would sound like if it was tracked perfectly in my mind. And then I'm doing the actual mix work. Not to say that it wasn't tracked really well, it was, but it's more like if I had tracked it, what would it have sounded like coming in? So, okay, so then we get down to the actual work here, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and a lot of stuff that isn't going on. I think we can make that inactive. I think I set up RVox to see if it would sound good, and this was one of the few times where I didn't care for it. But let's solo Amirror up. And let's also solo her return.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning.
So here's how she sounded with just the Melodyne CLA2A and SSL channel.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling. Hold up, can't think it over when I'm sober. Just want to love you up in it over.
And that sounds really good. That would be like, okay, I did my job as a tracking engineer. It sounds really good coming in. Are there things that still need to improve? Yes. Some of the dynamics are a little all over the place. There's a couple of resonances that need to be worked out. So this this looks crazy, but it's probably not so crazy sounding.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
So it's mostly mainly controlling the mids, which is where some of those like kind of wild resonances are showing up. Then this is like some very fine tuning, I think of this as like the makeup. This is like, putting on the contouring, as I call it, defining the lines of the face. Same idea, we're defining the lines of the sound. So very subtle little roll off in the bass, little roll off in the low mids, little roll off in the upper mids.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
And now we have a really, really nice sound. It's smooth, it's balanced, the top end is present, the mids are controlled. Now, dynamic control.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling. Hold up, can't think it over.
And then I guess I started doing something, but this isn't doing anything, so it's actually only 3 plugins. However, once I get that stuff down, this is where the fun stuff begins, right? We get something that sounds really good. Now the question is, how do we make it larger than life? And that's going to come down to our parallel processing. So if I were to pull this in, and I were to cut the ambiances, it would sound like this.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody. Can't think it over when I'm so.
In the context of the mix, it's coming off as a little bit thin. So how do we remedy that? First of all, we have a parallel return right here.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
So immediately, this makes the vocal a million times more present.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody.
It sounds horrible on its own. Basically, it's the CLA76, which I still use for parallel compression very frequently. I experiment with other things, but I come back to this very frequently. And the constant for vocals, for me, is that the attack is usually very fast, and that this range between 7 and 6 right here is a punch control, basically. How much extra little bit of punch do I want? Do I want it to be absolutely pancaked, streamlined, or do I want it to be, have a little bit of hit to it in the parallel thing? And that really just depends on how rhythmic I want the vocal. I ended up settling around here. And the release control is how much I want the sound to breathe. In this particular case, it's almost as fast as it can get, so there's almost no breathing to it. It's just a really heavy-handed compression.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but
you can still hear a little bit of that punch, right, from the slowed down attack on like the plosive sounds, especially the body, and I think that helps the top line stick a little bit by drawing the ear to it. Next, I've got a little bit of distortion on here, a little saturation, a little distortion, and even a little noise. This is giving it some texture. This is giving it some hair, some little bit of harmonic juice.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
And then my last move, and I've been doing this a lot more in the last few years, is taking my parallel channel and ending it with the Waves MV2. I love this plugin. I think this is one of the best plugins ever. It just always sounds really good on all sorts of stuff, and it's really easy to set up. But a little bit of the low level, a little bit of the high level just brings in that extra little bit of body to the sound that we were already getting, but now we're getting even more of.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody. Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
There's a good color to it. There's also a good rhythm to it. It like stretches the vocal in a really nice way. And then when it gets recombined with the signal, we end up getting something that's really forward and full and strong sounding.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody.
All that comes down to a vocal bus with fresh air. I don't use fresh air as much these days. I think I like the FG 368, 36A. Yeah, FG 36A a little bit better, but fresh air is still good. It's a little easier than setting up like a parallel exciter chain. And then from there, we get our verbs and our delay. So the verbs and the delay are really fun. The verbs are getting two sends at the same time. I've got a short verb, which is my romantic plate preset. If you have the Relab LX480, this MW guy showed up again. Is it? I know that people think like using presets is cheating, but like, is it cheating if I'm using my own presets? I don't. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Guess what? It's not. If you use my presets, then you just have good taste. So I've got this shorter reverb here, and that's kind of acting as like a set of early reflections and color for the vocal itself.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling. Hold up, can't think.
This is just a very tiny bit of low end roll off. I mean, I guess I was being really nitpicky, but yeah, did that. And then there's a second verb, which is a longer verb. It's creating more of an atmosphere, and that's the MW Vox Dance Hall. So two different presets being combined together.
Body needs your body. Can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling.
On this longer reverb, I'm also putting in LFO tool to do a quarter note pump. Kind of like an EDM song, how it goes like womp, 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 womp in the bass. I've got that going on in the reverb here. So not in my early reflection style reverb, my shorter reverb, but in my longer reverb, there's a little bit of that pulse. And that's going to come up in a couple of different ways through the course of this vocal overview. And then there's also a delay. And the delay is a eighth note ping pong with that LFO tool pulse again.
Your body can't keep it up to the morning. Try not to need nobody, but it's you keep on calling. Hold up, can't think it over when I'm sober. Just want to love.
I do also have a delay throw that's in there. It's kind of a telephonic delay throw where the vocal gets compressed and then it has, look, it's called telephone. So yeah, telephonic. And then it's being panned around. So it's kind of like a fun little thing. Oh my gosh, this is out of date. So this is probably EQ'd in some way that I can't tell. Okay, it has been a few years. Whoops. Either way, it still sounds good. And then that is getting sent, like the regular delay, this delay throw that's only happening on certain words is also getting sent to the reverbs, which is something I do very, very commonly. Anytime I have a delay on a vocal, I tend to send at least a little bit of the delay into my main reverbs as well. It's like instant glue. It's very easy to get the sound to just connect when you do that. So, okay, so that's Amirror's vocal. Now, Khan's vocal is a little different. With Khan's vocal, I didn't need to do any kind of pre-treatment, like with the Melodyne autotune and then using the CLA2A and the Waves SSL, because I did the tracking for Khan. We recorded in the living room of my apartment in LA, and the vocal chain was a JZ V67 going into an Avalon M5, and that combination works really well for Khan. The JZ V67 has a lot of body and warmth and roundness to it. The Avalon M5 has a little bit of brightness to it, so the two kind of combine really well on Khan's naturally bright voice to get something that sounds kind of sort of finished, actually. I'll solo it up for you.
I just realized that I don't like to be solo. And you are my type of girl that I never let go to. She like to ride to the rhythm and she know how to get 'em no promo. She let me whine just a little, then she grind on my middle like a go-go.
And that's just a great sound. It just works for him. So there is still sort of, yeah, any good mic, any good preamp, you'll get a decent sound that'll be usable, but there is still something to be said for like matching a microphone and a preamp to an artist's voice. And I think that's a really, really nice starting place for him. I did a little additional compression. He didn't need much. He also has a very even delivery. I should mention that. One of the reasons why I don't need to track him with compression, when I do, it's usually a CL1B and it's very gently set. But a lot of the times I don't, and it's just because he has a really good control over his voice. And also, while I'm recording, I'm also setting up things, comping in different takes, cutting out noise, shifting time. Like, I'm doing everything to make the vocal already sound really good coming in. So a little bit of compression, and then I did a little bit of EQ as well. There was a couple of resonances. Notice that with my notches here, I'm not pulling out all 19 dB. I'm not just killing the tone. I'm only pulling out what I need to pull out in order to make things sound even. And then rolling off some of the deep, deep lows, giving a little bit of presence to the high.
I just realized that I don't like to be solo. And you are my type of girl that I never let go to. She like to ride to the rhythm.
Okay, and then, very end, one little tiny notch out at 1K. That was still kind of bothering me.
I just realized that I don't like to be solo.
Then we get the same verbs, same delays, same parallel return, so it feels nice and cohesive, creates a nice blend. There's also some reply lines.
To be solo. Don't like to be solo. And you are.
So you'll notice this sounds a lot thinner, and that is deliberate. It's supposed to be a response line. The big difference here is that my verbs here are maybe -5 down. The verbs here are sent a little bit higher, and the delay is set a lot higher. So the delay here is -17.5, well, 0.4, and then the delay on this kind of response line here is 7 dB higher. So it creates this effect of somebody in the background like calling out over the space.
I just realized that I don't like to be solo. And you are my type of girl that I never let go. She like to ride to the rhythm.
And so it's kind of more of a background vocal than a lead. So then I have a couple of reinforcing tracks. These show up in various places. They show up at the end of Amirror's verse.
What's about to come next got me excited. Oh no, oh no.
And I don't like to be solo.
And these are really simple. I have a mic and a preamp that do a really good job of flattering Khan's voice, so the only effect on here is a flanger.
Don't like to be solo.
And that's for the effect. So I didn't, it naturally cut some of the mids and rolled off some of the low end, so it really didn't need any EQ after that. It was just done. And I think there's an important lesson in that too, which is when you're done, stop. Like, if it sounds good, just like stop touching it. Is there some subtone in there? Maybe, probably, but I don't hear it and I don't care, so I just stopped messing with it. That's a very valuable lesson. Okay, this is a really, really interesting sound here. So there's all sorts of backgrounds going on in the chorus, and there's two very distinct sets. I'm going to solo those up because they're just super, super cool, and I'm pretty proud of what I'm doing with them. So we've got these.
Far away,
So the autotune is committed on them. What I wanted for the sound was something really deliberately synthy, and I actually did a video on using Little Altar Boy to create a synthy kind of sound, but what I'm doing is I'm using parallel formant shifting. The parallel formant shifting not only creates the sound of different formants, but it also creates a phase relationship that starts to sound kind of flangey and weird. Very, very synthy sound, and I really like it. In the other video, I think I used a similar technique to create a, not like a talk box. I think some people took that a little too literally, because welcome to the internet, but like a sort of talk box-ish kind of sounding effect. And that it relied on the same principle of using parallel formant shifting. So little altar boy with a mix knob. Really, really cool technique you can get a lot of neat textures out of. Then goes down to a bus. The bus gets the same reverb that everything's using. It has a delay as an insert. You know, it's not against the law to use a delay as an insert. The reason why I'm doing it on the channel is because right afterwards I've got, hey, look, LFO Tool again doing a quarter note pulse thing. So that's happening in the background vocals, giving the background vocal a little bit of that pulse movement. There's no rules here. You can do that on vocals. It's not against the law, and it works.
Far away, hey, 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 far away, hey, 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 my body needs your body.
So this is a really, really cool sound, these ahs that are forming this kind of choir. I wanted it to be, again, almost like a synth-like effect, but in a very different way. It's meant to color the background and create like an oil painting texture, so to speak. So I've got my auto-tune on there. It comes down, I'll bypass everything. First thing is radiator, just giving it a little bit of tone. Doubler, this is going to give it a little bit of a slightly flangy chorusy quality. And then comes some really fun stuff. So first I'm using Space, which is one of the coolest plugins because of the colors section. If you go under effects, there's these colors that create basically these like harmonic returns. And sometimes just going through and finding a really nice one adds like such a cool color. So here's our before. After. It's got this like creamy, that's the oil painting sound right there, is this harmonic return. I'll pull down the wet signal for, or I'll pull down the dry signal for a second. Where the heck was this? It was -3.1? Yeah. So it's really dark and weird and kind of grungy on its own. This is -3.1, and then, what is this, 0? Yeah. But when it all combines, it just sounds really rich. It gives it that, like, analog thing, for lack of a better way of putting it. Now, the space comes from this really crazy plugin, which, honestly, I've revisited GRM tools a number of times. I feel like I need a calculator in order to figure out how to get the best out of these things, but they are really cool tools, and in this case, I'm using this to create this reverb that feels like it's coming from everywhere, everything all at once. It's like breaking the space-time continuum. It's a totally surreal, bizarre, awesome reverb. Before... It moves around so much in such a weird way. It's like, it's very otherworldly, and it creates this really sort of, I want to say the word is ephemeral, although I'm not sure if I'm using that word correctly off the top of my head. Somebody get me a dictionary. Okay, getting out some of that sub stuff. We hear there's some thumping going on there. Maybe, you know, he was like accidentally tapping the base of the stand or something like that happens. And then also taking up some of the top end. Basically, this sound is supposed to sit in the background, so this is going to help it sit in the background. So much thinner sound once the processing is done. And then the final part, hey, look, it's LFO Tool doing a quarter note pulse again. This is all helping to contribute to the rhythm and make it less of like a streamline of sound and give it a little bit more movement in the sound. Movement is one of the most important things in a record because movement is what gets people to dance to it. And if you can get people to dance to a record, you have a hit record. That's really like, it's top line, movement. Maybe even top line and movement. They might even be neck and neck. It's very close. Very, very close. I think top line might be the best because it gets people to sing along. And that, if you can get people to sing along with the record, you have a smash. If you can get people to dance to a record, that's pretty darn close, pretty darn important. And if you can get both, you have a hit.
When you go far away, hey, 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 far away, hey, 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 my body needs your body, far away, my body needs your body.
Kublan provided this.
Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day.
Which I had to re-edit and commit because I moved Amirror's timing around a little bit, but that's a 4-mint pitch-shifted version of Amirror's vocal, believe it or not. I think that covers it. I want to say there might have been one other thing. I know sometimes when Khan does the writing for records, which this is one of those times, I'll leave Khan's vocal in really, really low underneath the lead vocal. I'm not sure I did that this time. No, that's loud. That's not left underneath. Yeah, I guess I didn't do that this time, but very often I will. So there will be like, whoever the writer was, their voice will be like way low, but it just adds a little bit of fullness and extra something to the record. Not on this one though, I guess. But worth mentioning that I do that. Okay, Mixbus. So the very end of the record, here's what it sounds like without anything on the Mixbus.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day. Right now I can breathe.
So to me, that's not really finished. The first thing here is this God particle. I like this. I don't use it on my Mixbus quite as much as when I first got it. When I first got it, I sort of realized pretty quickly you have to mix into it a little bit in order to get what you want out of it. I do still use this a lot though on my drum bus because it does something to the shape of the drums that's just like such a cool sound. So I do still use it. I just don't use it on Mixbus quite as much. But here's our before and after.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day. Right now I can breathe. This is what you do to me when you go far away. Hey, 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 far away. Hey, 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 my body.
So it changes the shape of the kick drum a little bit. It gives it a little bit more thwap, so to speak, but like in a really good way. And it changes the tone curve ever so slightly to just allow for a little bit more presence, a little bit less buildup in the mids, and then it kind of smooths the dynamics out over everything and widens everything a little bit just to make it all a little bit more present and kind of glue it all together. So it's one of those things where like the mix falls apart a little bit without it because I mixed into it for like the last 25% of the mix. And I really like what it's doing, so I mean, I don't think that that's regrettable at all. I might start bringing it back to my Mixbus actually a little bit more. But yeah, once it's on there, you can't really take it off because it becomes part of the sound. Now, after the fact, starting to do a few other little things. This is just some basic brightness here with the Pull Textile EQ, pulling up around 10K. Pretty typical.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day. Right now I can breathe.
In anything that's like Afro or Afro derived, which includes a lot of Latin music, because a lot of Latin music is actually originally African music. It's important to have that top end of the transient really defined because of the rhythmic elements that are involved. And so going a little bit on the bright side, I think, is important for anything that's rhythm driven with like inside percussion groove. For EDM, the brightness comes from the synths more than anything else. It's the groove is in the low end exclusively, but here, because you have all those like shekarays and, you know, different kind of like tappy sort of rim sounds and things like that and percussion elements, you need to articulate those, otherwise the music ends up getting lost. Then the last step here is a little bit of the same thing, just a very, very tiny bit of mid scoop and a very, very tiny bit of presence boost.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away. Baby, I miss you every day. Right now I can't breathe. This is what you do to me.
I would say, you know, maybe going back on it, I might not have even needed this cut here.
I know I bring up drama every day. Baby, don't run from me. My body needs your body. Please don't go far away.
But that's what I did. Probably didn't need it. But then I sent it off to mastering like this. So that means whatever the God Particle was doing, whatever the Acoustica Purple was doing, and whatever the Air EQ was doing, that's what I sent over to Dave Huffman, who did the mastering, and he worked with it from there. So I am not the type of person who would ever recommend leaving your mix bus dry if you have effects that pull your mix together. Send your mastering engineer the best version of what you've got, period. Any mastering engineer worth their salt will agree with that. So yeah, that wraps up this mix. I'll put the link to the music video in the description. It's really, really fun. So, you know, check it out. You'll get to hear the final product, the final song. And yeah, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notifications so you get notified. If you want to attend weekly webinars where we go over records, where I mix records that I'm being hired to mix and explain all of my thought process, all my decision making like this, but in real time and in more depth, with the ability to ask questions, get feedback on mixes, discuss things, you're going to want to join Weiss Advice, weissadvice.com. I believe that it is the best resource for getting better at recording and mixing that is available on the web. I'm sure some of my peers who I love to death would disagree because they think they have the best stuff, but I have the best stuff. Anyway, yeah, join Weiss Advice, get to attend those webinars, get access to all my full-length tutorials. That link will also be in the description below. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.